So my last video showed you how to take the battery box off. Obviously a couple bolts is pretty easy. One here, two on the sides, on each side, and then one way down here up front. Don't forget about that one. Pull the battery box off after you get the screws off. Set this off to the side. Kind of careful with it. It's not very flexible plastic. It is extremely rigid. So again, in the last video, I kind of talked about this being your converter that converts AC to DC. They call it a rectifier, 12-volt rectifier. But this is what gets your signal off your coil down into your motor, sends it up here, converts it to charge your battery and give it a little extra power for all your other accessories. Down in here, this is your CDI box. Again, pull this out. This is a CDI box, and this is what controls your spark, your signal, kind of timing and all that versus, for electronics. If you ever have anything spark-wise, electronics-wise, might want to look at this as a maybe troubleshooting if you're not getting spark for some reason. Also, obviously, look at your coil, look at your spark plug, and that kind of thing. But this box is kind of hidden up inside the battery cover. And then slide this guy off. This is your starter coil. This is what sends the high voltage. You got a kind of a low voltage signal that comes in from your key to actually start, but this actually sends that high voltage current down to your starter. So again, I'm gonna go ahead and start clipping some of these wires just to free it up so you guys can see. Again, coil for starter, CDI box, rectifier. Tell you what, really we're going to be concerned about this right here, this plug. So this is your ignition plug. If you trace this, it goes all the way up here over to your ignition down here. I'm sorry. So it goes all the way up to there, so your key on and off and everything like that. So if you push down that little tab right here that you kind of see, little tab right there, the thing pops apart and you can kind of slide this out of the way, look at it. So for me, you can buy a kit, and they sell a kit to actually kind of pop the pins out and splice into the wires. Not really splice, you're not doing any cutting, crimping or anything like that. But you pop one of these pins out and replace it with another pin. It kind of gives you a jumper harness essentially, so you're not doing anything with the factory wiring. For me, I've been around 12 volts for a long time and I actually want to solder in, but I'm going to, instead of on this main thick harness, I'm going to keep everything on the switch side. Just in case something go bad, I can just replace this switch instead of the whole main harness. So when you unclip it, this is the switch side. Again, pretty easy to tell. It's got all the male pins down inside there. Female housing, but male pins. And then easiest way to tell, this is the big thick harness right here. Everything I'm going to do is on the opposite side of that. So this was the plug that clipped in. I'm going to leave this plug alone and just do my my splicing in here. Alright, so I went and grabbed my multimeter. And this is not a standard multimeter. It's actually called multifunction auto tester. Again, I've been doing electronics for quite a while. This thing's super handy. It allows me to test circuits, not just what the voltage is and kind of probe. So neat thing about this is it's got two clip leads. These clip directly to the battery, positive and negative, and then they just plug straight into the meter. So what that allows is to always have power or ground if I need it right here on the meter. So push forward on this button and I get power at the tip, and push backwards on that button and I actually get a ground at the tip, which is again really nice. It also tells me if there's power here, so what the voltage is, but a positive. If I touch a wire and not touch any of these buttons, I get a signal here if it's a negative green light, ground. So it's really handy just to figure out what wires are what. And you can reference some of the other videos. But as far as the plugs go, again, we're looking at the ignition itself, ignition harness, which is your key start. And there's a solid black wire right here that we want to kind of tap into. That solid black wire, when you turn the key on to accessory, gets power from this 12 volt wire right here. This red wire is solid 12 volts all the time. And then again, this will, when you turn your key on, this will get that 12 volt signal. So it's got a little LED display on there. It tells me what the voltage is. Of course, there's nothing there. But if I hit the positive button, 12 volts, 12.8 volts, 12.8 volts, and it's positive. That's pretty much thinking that it's touching something, but that's what it is. If I hit the ground button, the negative, shows me 0 volts, and it also lights that up. So again, you're sending power, sending ground, just kind of obviously talking about this multifunction tester. Again, we have the ignition harness, so looking on this side, if I touch that red lead right here, I got 12.7 volts. Again, I showed you 12.8, from the meter. There you go, 12.7 volts on this side. Obviously, nothing on this side because it's not connected to anything, right? But again, this side is the signal side for the start or ignition. So if I actually do power this, let's see if you can show my display. Give this a little power here, and you see that light comes on. It's pretty much just like it started, which is really cool. Again, and if I go ahead and hit the starter, again, that's still on. Go ahead and reach over here with giving it power, hit the starter, it starts. I've got my tools ready to splice into that black wire. Again, make that as obvious as I can. Black wire on the ignition switch side, not the main harness side. So for this, I'm actually going to pop that wire out, and then that way I don't have to kind of fight all these other wires. So push that down inside there. There's a little pin that kind of holds that spade connector from pushing back through. So see if I can push that down. There we go. So you can kind of feel it like click a little bit, even though it's not clicking into anything. But again, this is the wire that we want to use. So I will splice into this, and again, yeah, I'm going to splice into it. Multiple ways to do that. Take a razor blade and ever so slightly, right about here, kind of roll that insulation, and I do that about a ½ an inch back from that initial one. Kind of roll the insulation, and then you can probably can't see it on the camera, but you can just barely take some insulation off at a time. Again, this takes a little bit of time. Plenty of other ways. I'm sure there's going to be comments on how to do this. Yeah, so what I like to do is kind of, once I get it just barely cut through the top, is I just kind of work it back and forth, and what happens is that wire just pops right out of there. And you can actually go in and pull it with your fingers, and you can separate it, and take a probe, pick of some sort, but take your probe, kind of go in there and dig out those wires, obviously being very gentle and careful, but get those wires out of there. So that leaves that back side kind of open, and then you can go in with some good straight cutters, just like you're cutting a zip tie or something of that nature, and grab this, the back side right here, just like so. And same thing on this side. They're flush cutters, just like for cutting zip ties. So you come in as flush as you can right there. There you go. So now you got that nice clean exposed copper ready to be soldered onto. So what I've got, I went to my local auto store, picked up a fuse. Obviously you want to have everything fused. So this is just a heavy duty inline fuse. Probably throw a 10 amp fuse in there. Take that out of the box. What this looks like is just 2 leads, good waterproof connection inside of here. Yeah, we'll throw a fuse in there here in a little bit. But I am gonna strip the wire back. That's not enough to solder. Never is. It's enough to put a crimp on there, but you can't solder onto that. So we've got some wire strippers here. There's multiple different style wire strippers, obviously. I'll strip the wire back a little bit further, so that way I can kind of do a little bit of a wrap on there too. All right. So I got that wire stripped back. And what I like to do, I know this is kind of a big wire for this little bitty thin wire, but what I like to do is typically I'll thread it through here. So even though it kind of looks like it's twisted, you know, I'll separate the wire a little bit, and use a pick or whatever tool you have to kind of separate the wires, kind of split it 50-50, one on one side, one on the other side. A little bit of a hole. There we go. You can actually thread this through there then. Make sure I twist the wires. Thread that through. Perfect. And then you can go ahead and spin this back around. You know, kind of tighten it up on itself. So I got a lot exposed right now. I will cut off the excess on that back side. But what I like to do is just make sure there's plenty sticking through. So that way when I solder, I can get this area right here. Point out here a little bit more. So I can get this area right here, you know, get that good and soldered so that joint's solid. You know, and then I'll come back with some tape and tape this up. Another fancy tool for doing electronics and whatnot is this butane soldering iron. So it's really handy, so you don't have to have a cord. Pretty much turn it on, turn the gas on, and it comes with a flint lighter, but a lighter works really well just to get it going. This flint on the lid does alright, but when it's kind of windy out, which it's got a little bit of a breeze, obviously it doesn't do great in super windy conditions, but it really does help out. You know, or it's really nice. If there is a little bit of a breeze, you can still solder and whatnot, but lighter works really well. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that tip off while I'm waiting for it to get everything. Got my solder. I always go ahead and try to dab it. Yep, it's hot on the tip. So the biggest thing on this is you want to solder on the wire. You want to put it on the back side, and you want to actually put solder on the front side. You want that solder to actually melt with the wire, not with the soldering iron itself. So typically I do a little bit of solder on the tip. That's called kind of tinning. Helps with, you know, conducting the heat a little bit better. But then I just apply that right there on that back side. Give it a few minutes, a few seconds sometimes. Starts getting warm, and you'll see this wire just push right in as soon as it gets hot enough, which takes a little bit for this thicker wire. Again, this is why I undo it from the connector, so that way I'm not heating up the connector or anything like that. Maybe tin a little bit more. There it goes. It's starting to go in. And just start kind of moving it around a little bit, and you'll be able to get all of it tinned in really good or soldered in really well. So again, sometimes it takes a minute to warm up the thicker wire compared to the thinner wire, but this should suck solder all the way around to that back side too. Obviously I'll double check it, make sure it's soldered really well. A little bit more heat. Alright. Yeah, look around that back side, it's already soldered. I didn't even put solder on there. It just kind of sucks it all the way around. Alright, as I said, I'll come back here, trim this off, this excess off. I don't need that sticking out on the back side. And everybody's got their opinion on how to do this, but this is going from a super thick gauge wire down to a really thin wire, you know, this is pre-terminated. So Alrighty. So that is ready to tape. And again, I use electrical tape on everything I solder. Sometimes I'll heat shrink it as well. If I can get in there, any type of splices, it's electrical tape only. Brand of preference or brand of choice, Scotch. I use it on pretty much everything. It seems to last really long. Yeah, so that's it. That's a made plug or spliced in plug. So put this back in. I gotta use my probe tip a little bit to kind of bend that tab back out. That's the tab that I had to push in earlier. So I'll make sure I put that tab in on the correct side. You can kind of see it inside of here maybe. Right now with this disconnect tab facing downwards, the tab on this connector is downwards as well. So when I push this in, if you can maybe hear it, that little click right there, now it's in. And if you look, my splice way back here, come up here, and quite honestly I did that and pushed it that way because it's got this boot on here, and I wanted to keep this on here too. It's not really kind of a waterproof boot, but I don't know, but I wanted to make sure that stayed there and stayed that right direction. So there you go, splice is done. And then come back with this connector, line up this little loop right here to that little tab, push it all together, wiggle wiggle, slide that back for a second, make sure that's all the way seated, and then slide this as far forward as I can. So I've kind of kept the integrity of this connection right here, but then again made a little splice to it. So if we want to see what that looks like, I'll pull this off. Let me go get a fuse real quick. Alright, so I got my 10 amp fuse right here I'm going to put in here. Again, this is all nice and clean. I am going to put this in here, 10 amp fuse. And be careful obviously not to touch anything, but I kind of want to give an example of what this is going to do now. So I got to straighten the handlebars just a little bit so I can get the key. And I'll show you. There we go. So the key is in, but not on. It's just in. And again, right here is my meter. Touch it to this wire. No power, no nothing. It's just not even a ground signal or anything like that. It's just bare wire. Turn the ignition on, and voila, 12.7 volts. You can see the red light, maybe the voltage, if it's a little bit of glare on the camera. But anyways, 12 volts right there. So now I've got an ignition source for wire, which is, or for lights or accessories or anything like that. Super handy. It's off the DC side, so it's always going to be, again, 12 volts. And so when I shut the key off, that light shuts off. So that shows that it's an accessory wire now. So what I plan on doing to splice into that accessory wire is actually not it's a splice of some sorts, but it's actually a connector. Wago, W-A-G-O, is a brand name of a connector, but they're all the style connector. You can lift up this little tab right here. There's happens to be 5 of them on this one, and so you can put power to any one of these tabs, and they are all connected together. So if I insert this wire into this tab, then any of these other tabs will then have power. So I plan on kind of using this as a splice so I can plug and play whatever I need. Just super handy, so that way if I change my mind, add stuff, I don't have to redo connectors or redo soldering. And these are really good, again, for connecting multiple things together. So I'll go ahead and trim this back a little bit more just to make sure that I get the connector all the way in. It just barely kind of reaches to the edge. Alright, so yeah, got that connected. Put the cap on there for right now, and I'm going to make a black wire that's going to go straight to the battery. So that way I have another, I'm actually going to use another one of these connectors and a battery with a ring terminal, and it's just going to go straight to this negative post, so that way I always have a ground, and so I'll have an accessory and ground right here. Alright, so I got that connector in there, or wire in the connector, and so I will go ahead and put this to the negative post. To undo the little probe that I have. And undo this negative post on this side. And you really can't see what I'm working on. I just undid the power to the little multi-tester that I have. There's a little nut for this battery terminal that you have to be a little careful with. It will go sliding off. There you go. And it came out. So the terminal on both positive and negative side has got this little nut right here. You can kind of see a little flat, and it just slides underneath the terminal over here, and that's what captures this bolt that goes down through. So you got to be careful when you're taking either terminal off. Hold on to that. So go ahead and thread. Make sure the bike harness is on the bottom, so that way it always has the best contact. And then we'll put the auxiliary harness. Again, this is just the ground wire. We're going to put that on top. So feed that little nut in there, kind of get everything lined up. There we go. This is kind of what I did. I just kind of cut that little flap, and it'll tuck down a little bit better in a minute. But this is my negative cable, and then my ignition on cable. Video on how to make your ignition, essentially your own little ignition harness to clip whatever you want to in, and everything runs off of the key. Again, so I'll show that, you know, or I had shown that earlier. There we go. Hook my little probe back up. Again, battery is off. Nothing, no power, nothing. But as soon as I turn this key on, there we go. We got 12 volts right there as soon as I turn the key on, which is pretty nice. I get my hand out of the way. Pretty nice. Again, this little meter tells me right here on this, if I plug it in, oh, I got a ground right there. Pretty easy. And kind of a little bit of a glare, but plugging it in right there, opposite of the furthest pin away, I've got a good ground right there. So that's good to know. Again, 12 volts with the key right here. Shut the key off. Hold this here. There we go. Shut the key off. That red light goes away. No power, no nothing. So that's awesome. So I'll be using this in the future. Again, I'll tuck all these wires back up underneath. That's really all I needed to get to was just this ignition harness wire, so I can get that accessory position. You know, and I'll have these down here together somewhere. You know, obviously you can kind of split the positive and negative, run it wherever you need to for whatever accessory. But yeah, thanks for watching.